Today we'll look at the nature of science, which is Chapter 1. Chapter 1, Section 1, the nature of science. We have two objectives. First, we want to identify the requirements of science. Then we want to distinguish scientific hypothesis, theory, and law. So before we get started, we need to define science. What is science? Science is the knowledge and the study of natural things based on observations and repeatable experiments. So then what are the requirements of science? Science must be based on experiments, and they must be repeatable, and they must be based on observations. Let's look at the three branches of natural science. There's biological science, physical science, and earth science. Biological study involves the study of botany, plants, zoology, animals, ecology, the relations between them. Physical science is the study of physics and chemistry. Physics is forces and energy. Chemistry is the study of matter and its changes. The third branch of natural science is earth science, which is the study of geology, rocks, meteorology, which is weather, and astronomy, which is outer space. We're going to look at scientific statements and we're going to classify them. We'll classify them as either an observation or an inference. Also, we'll classify them as a hypothesis or a scientific law or a scientific theory. First, let's define observation and inference. An observation is defined as information gathered through the five senses: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. An inference is an explanation or an interpretation of an observation. Let's look at this picture and classify each statement as an observation or as an inference about the picture. Pause the video and write down some guesses. When we look at these statements and we're looking for an observation, remember, an observation is information gathered using the five senses. So the first statement is an observation. The grass is wet with a colorless liquid. We can determine that through sight. When a person says that sprinklers ran last night, that is an interpretation, but it is not an observation with the five senses. Write down a few of the examples in handwritten notes and let's try some questions. We've looked at observation and inference and been able to define them and tell the difference. Next, we're going to look at hypothesis, scientific law, and scientific theory. A hypothesis is defined as a possible answer to a question that can be tested. It must be testable. Scientific law and a scientific theory have both been tested. But there's a difference. A scientific law is a tested description of a natural event. It describes what has happened. A scientific theory is a tested explanation of a natural event. It explains why something occurs. Between scientific law and scientific theory, which one has been proven and will never change? Neither one. A scientific law can be changed and a scientific theory can be changed based on new discoveries. Let's apply these concepts to the following question. Tomorrow morning, what will we see in the sky? And let's look at what three people say. One person says, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I'll see the sun in a clear sky. This is classified as a hypothesis because it's a possible answer to a question that can be tested. Another person states, the sun repeatedly rises in the east and sets in the west. This has been tested many times and it describes a natural event, so it is classified as a scientific law. A third person says, the sun rises in the east due to the Earth's rotation. This is classified as a scientific theory because it's been tested and it explains a natural event. Next, let's define a scientific model. A scientific model is a representation of something that is too big, too small, or too complex to study easily. We'll look at a couple of examples. The solar system is massive, and we create a model made out of styrofoam. It's a model of the solar system. It helps us know the order of the planets, for example. Another example of a scientific model would be the planetary model of the atom. The atom is very small, and Ernest Rutherford in 1911 said, an atom is like the solar system. It's got a nucleus, which is like the sun, and electrons are flying around it, just like planets go around the sun. Another scientific model would be the Punnett square of genes. This was learned in life science, where if we studied a pea plant and we wanted to know what the flower color is like for the offspring, we can use a Punnett square of genes. In section 1.1, we had two objectives: to identify the requirements of science and to distinguish scientific hypothesis, theory, law, and model. Today we're going to continue our study of the nature of science. We're on section 2, so chapter 1, section 2 is the study of the way that science works. Our objectives are to describe the steps of the scientific method, to identify metric prefixes, and to perform metric conversions. In a later video, we'll define the common measurements of volume, mass, weight, and temperature, and we'll name the SI units for common measurements. But today we're going to describe the steps of the scientific method, and we'll identify the metric prefixes and perform metric conversions. So let's look at the scientific method. The scientific method has several steps. It is a way for us it's a series of steps followed to solve problems. The first step is to make an observation, and then as a result to form a question. We research and collect data, then we form a hypothesis, which is a way to test this idea. We test the hypothesis through an experiment, we record observations in this experiment, and we draw conclusions. And this process can repeat over and over again. We're looking at scientific method, which is a series of steps followed to solve problems. A variable is a factor that changes in an experiment in order to test a hypothesis. The independent variable is the variable the scientist chooses to change. The dependent variable is the variable that the scientist observes. Everything else is controlled. So the controlled variables actually remain constant. The part of an experiment in which nothing is changed is called the control. Why do we test only one variable at a time? Why do we have a control? And why do we have many trials? We test one variable at a time to identify the variable that caused the change. We have a control because we want to eliminate the other variables. And why do we do many trials? To confirm the results. We're going to practice identifying the variables in a scientific experiment. So let's look at this first experiment. Miss Newcomb, in life science, wanted to see if the color of light shined on a planet had any effect on the number of leaves it had. She gathered two groups of the same species of plants, gave them the same amount of water, did the test for the same amount of time. On one group of plants, she used white light. On the second group, she changed the light color to red. Consider the following questions. Hit pause and come up with some answers. Let's look at the answers. What was the independent variable? It was the red light because that's what the scientist chose to change. Identify the dependent variable. That's what the scientist observed as a result, and that was the effect on the number of leaves. Three things we kept constant: the same species of plants, the same amount of water at the same time. So then what did Miss Newcomb use as a control group? The group with the white light. And what did Miss Newcomb use as an experimental group? The group with red light. We've looked at the steps of scientific method. Next, let's look at the metric system. Metric system. In 1960, the International System of Units had all the countries getting together, and they said, we need to have a common set of measurements. We call them the SI units, or the metric system. These are the units used by scientists. Why should we use SI units? The United States currently uses the imperial system, which is miles and yards and inches. The imperial system was established hundreds of years ago. For example, the yard. The yard was defined by King Henry I in England in 1200 AD. He said, a yard is the distance of my arm from my thumb to my nose. This is the imperial system. Should we be using that repeatedly? No, we don't use that anymore, or we wish we had not used it anymore. Why should we use SI units? Because SI units are exact. If the king gets a longer arm, what happens to the distance of the yard? It's easier because SI units are based on 10. There isn't 3 feet in a yard. I mean, we don't have to deal with numbers like 3 and 12 and 5,280. Also, SI units are universal. All the other countries use it, and it will make it much easier for us to talk with them. A meaningful measurement must have a number and it must have units. Units are important because if I ask you, how much soda pop did you drink for dinner? And you say 355, we don't know what that means. Is that quarts or cups or ounces? Is it milliliters or liters? So we must have a unit in a measurement. Also, meaningful measurements always have one estimated digit. So if I asked you, how far did you have to travel to get a lollipop? And you tell me 1 centimeter or 1 kilometer or 1 meter or 1 millimeter, if we listed from the largest distance to the smallest distance, we'd get this. 1 kilometer is the largest, then comes 1 meter, then 1 centimeter, then 1 millimeter is the smallest. Let's look at what these prefixes mean. Prefixes for large measurements would be like kilo, which is 1,000 times bigger, mega, which is 1 million, and giga, which is 1 billion. Those are large prefixes. Then prefixes for small measurements would include deci, which is 1/10, centi, which is 1/100th, milli, 1/1000th, micro, 1/1,000,000th, and nano, 1/1,000,000,000th. There are 3 that you must know in physical science, and that's kilo and centi and milli. So let's write the equalities. First of all, what's bigger, 1 kilometer or 1 meter? 1 kilometer has 1,000 meters. Centimeter or meter, which one's bigger? 1 meter is bigger. How many little centimeters are in it? 100. Millimeter or meter, which one's bigger? 1 big meter has how many millimeters? It has 1,000 millimeters. Equalities are important because they help us convert from one set of units to another. So let's look at these equalities. Physical science students must show work using unit multipliers. So let's consider this question. Abby ran 292 meters when she ran a lap around the soccer field. Calculate the distance in kilometers. And the way we do this is we always start with 292 meters over 1. And then we want to convert to kilometers. So we write the unit multiplier so that meters will cancel. Meters will cancel if they're both in the numerator and denominator. And then kilometers will be on top because that's what we're trying to convert it to. We know that 1 big kilometer has 1,000 little meters in it. So next we do the calculation. Do we always take big divided by little, like 1,000 divided by 292? No, we always take the top divided by the bottom. In other words, 292, which is in the numerator, divided by 1,000, which is in the denominator. Physical science is studying Chapter 1, Section 2, the way that science works. Last time we discussed the scientific method and the metric system. This time we're going to focus on common measurements because we want you to get ready for labs. We'll define them and we will name and use the SI units. The common measurements we'll study are length, temperature, volume, mass, weight. We'll give the definition, the measurement tool, the units, and what they depend on. First, let's look at length. Length is defined as the shortest distance between 2 points. The units we use are meters, and the common tool is a meter stick. Remember that when we do measurements, we always estimate 1 digit. So let's practice. Let's practice what is the length of the black stick, and we always estimate 1 digit. This meter stick, it only tells us if we're less than 100 centimeters or greater than 100 centimeters. And so we'll approximate. It's about 20 centimeters. Could be 30 centimeters, but it's about 20. Then we use a better meter stick. It tells us when it is greater or less than 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters. And we can tell it's between 20 and 30 centimeters, so we feel confident about that. But we're going to estimate it's 22 centimeters, or your classmate might say 23 centimeters. Let's use a better meter stick. This meter stick has 100 lines between 0 and 100, and so it gives us much better measurement. Since between 20 and 30 there are 10 lines, we know the first line means 21, then 22, then 23, and we can see that the meter stick is between 22 and 23. We'd estimate 22.3 or 22.4 centimeters. And so we see how we measure length. Next, let's look at temperature. Temperature is the amount of an object's particle movement. The units can be Celsius or they can be kelvins. We use a thermometer. On the thermometer, 0 degrees Celsius is the temperature at which water freezes. 100 degrees is the temperature at which water boils. What does it depend on? Temperature only depends on the particle's movement. Let's practice reading a thermometer. When we look at the left thermometer, we see that the number is between 80 and 90. There are 10 lines, so each line is 1. The first line would be 81, then 82. When we look at this measurement, it's going to be between 80 and 90. It'll be greater than 87. So let's record that it is 87 point something. I think it's 0.4, and then we write the units, which are degrees Celsius. The thermometer on the right has the number 30, the number 40, and it has 10 lines. So the line that this temperature is reading on is 30.35. So we'd write down the number 35, but we still need to estimate one digit. And the person might say 35.0 degrees Celsius. Or another classmate might say 34.9 because it's a little bit lower than that. But notice that these thermometers must have measurements out to the tenths place. Next, let's look at volume. Volume is defined as the amount of space that an object has. The units are liters or milliliters, or they can be cubic meters or cubic centimeters. The scientist who established the metric system said, by definition, 1 centimeter is going to be equal to 1 milliliter. If you take a box and make it 1 centimeter wide, long, and high, that is defined as 1 milliliter. Volume depends on temperature and location. Let's imagine a balloon. If a balloon gets hot and you put it in the car, the volume gets bigger and bigger. Does the amount of matter increase? No, it's a closed balloon, but the volume increases. So volume depends on temperature. How about if we release the balloon and it rises in altitude, does that affect the volume? Yes, the volume gets larger and larger until the balloon pops. So volume depends on temperature. When we measure the volume of a liquid, we use a graduated cylinder. Notice that on the graduated cylinder, the liquid rises higher on the sides because it's attracted to the glass. So it has a curved surface. How do we measure it? At the top of that curved surface or at the bottom? That curved surface is called a meniscus. And when we measure liquid, we always measure the liquid volume from the bottom of the meniscus. Let's practice that. Here's a graduated cylinder, and let's look at the meniscus that lies at letter A. Where letter A is, first of all, the graduated cylinder has the 80 milliliter, it has 90 milliliter, there's 10 lines between it, so the first line is 81. The second line is 82. So we know that this volume is somewhere between 81 and 82. I'm going to record that it's 81.4, and then the units would be milliliters. But a person could say 81.5 and estimate one digit. Let's look at measurement B. Measurement B is right on that line. It's on the 79 line. And so we would say 79 point, we have to say something. We could say 79.0 or we could say 79.1. Could we just say 79 milliliters? We cannot, because on this piece of equipment, we must measure out to the tenths place. Let's look at letter C. The volume at letter C. It's exactly on the line, so we'd say 70, not 71, but we still need to estimate to the tenths place. So we'd say 70.0 milliliters. Or a person could say it's just a little bit above, so I'll say 70.1 milliliters. But each of these volumes goes out to the tenths place. Next, let's look at mass. Mass is defined as the amount of matter. The units are grams. 1 gram is about the mass of a paperclip. When we defined mass, or a gram, in the metric system, scientists made it easy for us. They said, first of all, 1 cubic centimeter is the same thing as 1 milliliter, no matter what the object is. But by definition, they said a gram is defined as the amount of matter that's in 1 milliliter. So 1 gram of water is equal to 1 milliliter, and it's equal to 1 cubic centimeter. Let's look at what mass depends on. Mass, the amount of matter, does not depend on temperature, and it does not depend on location, because the amount of matter does not change if it gets hot or if it rises in the atmosphere. It still has the same amount of matter. The instrument we use is a balance. Next, let's look at weight. Weight is defined as the amount of gravitational force on an object, and the units are newtons. 1 Newton is approximately the weight of an apple here on Earth, but it depends on location. When we go up to the moon, our weight, the amount of gravitational pull that we have on us, is much less. In fact, our weight is 1/6 on the moon than it is on the Earth because the moon is such a small object.